Hi everyone, so this is the second lecture and I'm going to get race into this lecture, and in the next chapters I'm going to get gender, sexuality, sexual orientation, gender, sex, sexuality, age in the elderly in the final lecture, okay? Because this one's kind of intense. So last lecture, the one that I posted up previously, we went over economic inequality and class. That is all listed in chapter 9, okay? Not all of it. Obviously, these lectures contain a bit more, and of course, you can find some of these questions on the exam, so it's very important that you guys actually watch these or listen to them. I don't expect you guys to watch them, but listen to them when you have time, okay? So let's get into it. This week we're going into all of social stratification. So we're going into all 6 of the types of inequality. But specifically for this chapter that I'm covering, we're going over chapter 11 in this lecture that's going into week 9. So the first lecture was on chapter 9 specifically. This one is on chapter 11. The next lecture for this week is going to be on chapters 12 and 13. Sound good? So let's get to it. Let me share my screen with you guys and we begin, okay? So we left off talking about, again, economic inequality. We went over economic inequality. We defined it. We defined what class is, what caste is, what the difference between those two are. And then we also went over the theoretical perspectives. So how a functionalist would view economic inequality, how a functionalist would, a conflict theorist would view economic inequality, and how a symbolic interactionist would view economic inequality. Today, with chapter 11, we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to go over racial inequality and components of racial inequality. So we're going to go over racism, prejudice, discrimination, institutional racism, ethnicity, symbolic ethnicity, assimilation, all of these things, right? And then we're going to go over the theoretical perspectives and how these theorists would look at racial inequality. So some of it is going to sound messed up, okay? Because remember, the functionalist says that economic inequality is beneficial to society, okay? So each person holds certain types of roles. So it's important, right, that these millionaires, these billionaires hold these positions because they're skilled. They can do those. Those are the most beneficial to society anyways. But it's also important that those janitors, those people who flip burgers at, fast food joints, they also hold a certain position in society. And their jobs aren't so valued, so that's why they get paid the way that they do. They should be striving, if they want to move, they should be striving to be like that millionaire, that billionaire, go to school, etc. Okay? The conflict theorist says the opposite, right? Economic inequality doesn't benefit those in the middle and lower classes at all. Economic inequality is kept in place to keep those at the top in their position, so it benefits them, it doesn't benefit us. And then symbolic interactionism, again, focuses on, again, it's a micro level type of scope, and it focuses on more so our neighborhood context, right? So the things that we may be able to control when it comes to economic inequality, we control and we do, or we adjust. So for instance, can we change our clothes? Can clothes dictate whether or not we get a job or not, whether or not we get a promotion or not, etc. Okay, so let's get into it. Racial inequality. Racial inequality is defined as a system of inequality in which members of one race are thought of and treated as less worthy than members of another, resulting in discrimination and exploitation. But what is race? Before we get into what is race, Take a look at this figure. This figure is directly pulled from chapter 11, our race and ethnicity chapter. And it is obviously a figure that depicts a Trayvon Martin protest. For those of you who might be young, Trayvon Martin, remember, he is a Black boy who was walking in his father's neighborhood in the late evening, and he was being followed by a man named George Zimmerman, who saw Trayvon Martin as suspicious. Okay, so and eventually was told to stop following Trayvon Martin by the operator, but continued. They got into a scuffle, and George Zimmerman shot Trayvon Martin. This is a very brief overview, very, very broad, but you can Google it on your own. It happened around 2010, etc. Okay? So you guys are living in 2020. You guys have other examples to pull from, okay? So this image could actually be updated. We've seen, and we're living in some turbulent times, right? So we don't need to necessarily look at Trayvon, because there's a lot of examples of people who have died like Trayvon. So for instance, do you think race played a role in Trayvon Martin's death? Do you think race played a role in, George Floyd's death? 2020, it happened over spring break, not spring break, it's not break at all, but the this COVID pandemic. Do you think race played a role in the death of Breonna Taylor? Okay, do you think race played a role in the death of Ahmaud Arbery? Okay, or do you think race played a role in the public reactions to these? Do you think race had any influence on the initial decision not to arrest George Zimmerman? Not to arrest the murderers of Ahmaud Arbery? Not to arrest the murderers of Breonna Taylor? Not to arrest the murderers of George Floyd? Think about it. But what I want to urge you guys to, again, think beyond yourself. We have our personal opinions. Those are important, okay? Our personal opinions are formulated based on the environments that we live in, our households, our families. They are important. But use your sociological imagination. Okay, if you don't think that race had any influence on these individuals' deaths, why? Why do you think that way? Have you ever experienced potential harm, potential violence based on your race? If not, why do you think that is? Etc. And we'll get more into it because there's more. Like, even I have to do reflecting, even though I identify as a person racially who is classified as Black in the United States. I'm not talking about ethnicity. That is different. Okay, and we will get to the difference between race and ethnicity in just a sec. Okay. So what is race? Race is a category which people are assigned to based on the social meaning and significance given to certain physical and sometimes cultural characteristics of members of a society's population. In other words, race is a socially defined category. Again, it's a social construct. Remember, a social construct is a human creation based on real or perceived biological differences, which what I will say is that race is most often based on perceived biological differences. And the reason why sociologists will always say this is because Humans, regardless of their race, are 99.9% genetically identical. Okay? You cannot swab someone's mouth to find their race. Okay? Can you track ethnicity? Yes, and that's different. But race, no. Okay? Race is still used to classify people, and sometimes race is a basis for differential treatment of individuals or groups of people. Before I move on to the next slide, right? Again, you cannot test for race, okay? We can test for ethnicity. So there you get your ancestry.com, like ancestry, genealogy.com, okay? Ethnicity is based on the region a person is most likely to come from based on certain types of markers, okay? And I'll get to that in just a sec because I have a slide for ethnicity, okay? And what is it? Race, the Power of Illusion. A great, great documentary. You could actually find it on YouTube, where a teacher actually swabs the inside of his students' mouths. But before swabbing, he asked each student, who do you think is more likely, you're more likely to be genetically identical to? Okay, so all the white students are like, this white kid, this white kid. All the black students are like this black kid, this black kid. All the Asian students are like this Asian kid, this Asian kid. All the American Indians are like this American Indian kid, this American Indian kid. Okay, obviously still thinking that race is something that is genetic. But what happens in this documentary, Race, the Power of Illusion, is that I am more likely to have genetic markers that are closer to someone outside of what we perceive Black people to have. So I'm more likely to be genetically identical to someone white, to someone Asian, etc. Okay? I will link that as an optional watch for you guys. Sound good? Okay. What's ethnicity? Ethnicity is a socially defined category based on the practices, the values, the beliefs of a group. So the Amish, for instance, are a distinct ethnic group in American society. They're linked together by a common heritage that includes language, religion, and a history. The Amish people, with few exceptions, are also white. On the other hand, Jewish people, contrary to what Nazis and other white supremacists may believe, are an ethnic group, but not a race. Remember, race is a socially defined category. Ethnicity and race are sometimes related, but they're not inextricably linked. Okay. Sociologists see race and ethnicity as social constructs, and this is because race isn't based on biology. For instance, we can't test to determine race. Racial categories also change over time. Racial categories, for instance, the racial category of white, Black, Asian and Pacific Islander, American Indian, right? They never have firm boundaries. In fact, Hispanic used to be a race in the United States, okay? It's no longer a race in the United States. And it actually makes sense that it's no longer a race in the United States, because when we say someone is Hispanic, we are referring to what? They speak Spanish, which is linked to ethnicity. So it makes more sense to classify that Hispanic group as an ethnicity, not a race. Okay? So only and Manat described this, you know, these racial categories collapsing or changing over time as racial formations. So race and racial categories go through racial formations constantly. Okay? I shouldn't say constantly. It takes a long time for racial categories to change in the United States. But we've seen it specifically beginning in 2010 with the 2010 census, okay? That's the first time where Hispanics could actually identify as white or Black, and the Hispanic category wasn't there. Okay, so oftentimes when you go to a clinic, oftentimes when you fill out applications for school, you know, the racial categories. Today, you will see white of Hispanic origin. So you're white and you're also, you classify as white, but Spanish speaking, or white of non-Hispanic origin. So you're white and you don't speak Spanish. You can also see Black of Hispanic origin, Black and Spanish speaking. Okay, or Black of non-Hispanic origin. So we have gone through a racial formation in the United States. That hasn't been the only racial formation in the United States, so. Okay. Again, these categories take time. Whites have gone through a racial formation in the United States. Many of you have parents who are from Italy, or grandparents, or great-great-grandparents. Italy, Ireland, the UK, etc. Right? If we're talking about our first and second waves of immigration in the United States, which were predominantly white, there are a lot of these groups that I just mentioned, the Italians, the Irish, that weren't seen as white when they initially set foot in the United States. Okay? However, based on racial formations, right, changing over time, these categories collapse and change, and there are too many immigrants coming from these Western worlds that all look the same. How do we now define these people? Because, like, yeah, they're all white. Okay, so based on policies and laws, racial formations can also occur. Okay. Ooh, sorry. What is racism? Let's break it down. Okay, so obviously I'm going through some terminology that is in your text in chapter 11 before we get into the meat of this. Okay, so what is racism? Let's break it down. Prejudice and discrimination. You guys should already know the difference between these two. Okay, people use them interchangeably. Do not. You're smarter than that. Okay. Prejudice is a thought process that refers to a biased way of thinking. So prejudice are the beliefs, thoughts, and feelings and attitudes about a group. It's usually applied to all members of that group. It's unlikely to change regardless of the evidence against it. Anyone could be prejudiced. Anyone, regardless of their race. Okay? Do not confuse prejudice with discrimination. Discrimination is the action, right? So prejudice is me thinking, oh my God, I hate people like that. That's prejudice, okay? It could also be verbal. Yo, I hate people like you. I dislike people like you. That's prejudice. Discrimination is the actual action, right? Where this can become physical. This can disrupt someone's life, okay? So discrimination is the unequal treatment of individuals because of their social group. And it is usually, most often, motivated by prejudice. So it goes beyond just disliking someone because of their beliefs, thoughts, etc. Right? Now, because I dislike you so much, I'm going to prohibit you from attending schools in my country. I'm going to limit your access to a fair education. I don't want you to shop at the grocery stores that I shop at. Okay? It can get worse than that. We've seen discrimination at play, right? I hate you so much that, you know, like, I'm going to go, well, we'll get to that, because then it actually becomes like a hate crime. Okay? But you get the point. Sorry for that long pause. Sometimes I just think in my head sometimes. Okay? But discrimination is the action. Okay? I'm gonna spit on you. That's discrimination. Okay? Know the difference between the two. They're not the same. Anybody can discriminate, regardless of race. Okay? I can discriminate. I can be prejudiced. You can too. And a lot of us hold prejudices in our heart. Many of us do not discriminate. Hopefully, many of us do not discriminate. Okay? But we all hold prejudices. It's up to us to check them. Okay? Check them when they enter our thoughts, our minds, etc. Why are we thinking this way? Okay? But many of us don't act on those beliefs. Okay? Then there's racism. Okay? So our textbook goes over the definition of racism, but our definition, again, we've been living in 2020. The definition of racism has been updated. I need to actually update it. This book needs to actually update it. Okay? Your book actually states, and I'm going to read it directly from the book, while prejudice is not necessarily specific to race, racism is a stronger type of prejudice used to justify the belief that one racial category is somehow superior or inferior to others. It is also a set of practices used by the racial majority to disadvantage a racial minority. The Ku Klux Klan is an example of a racist organization. Its members' belief in white supremacy has encouraged over a century of hate crimes and hate speech. Okay? But again, this is where I add more, not me adding more, but sociology has further developed racism, right? So there's personal racism and there's institutional racism. And this is where hearing and not jumping to conclusions is very, very important. So when you listen to people protesting about racial injustice, and I'm not just talking about Black Lives Matter, I'm also talking about currently the discrimination and the racism that Alaskan Natives are facing in 2020. You guys should be watching the news, okay? You guys should be reading newspapers. Also, American Indians in Toronto, in Quebec right now in 2020. When we're talking about racism, we're talking about institutional racism. That's not to say personal racism isn't an issue, but we're talking institutional. I'll start off with institutional racism. Institutional racism is racial prejudice and/or discrimination that is embedded in the routine functions and fabric of societal institutions. Okay? Remember our societal institutions. This is where, Emile and Talcott Parsons really come back to us. our institutions, family, religion, education, economy, the state, media, work, peers. Okay, those are our major institutions. Just because, you know, for example, this is a big one that's in news right now, right? Just because in 2020, I am allowed to teach college students in the United States does not mean that institutional racism within higher education, within education in general, is gone. Why would I say that? Okay. So prior to the 1960s, Blacks and people of color were not allowed to acquire an education in the same schools with one another. Okay? There were predominantly white colleges. Okay? And because whites, again, had majority of the economics, the politics, etc., like that, right? They built these schools and they closed doors. Again, we're going through segregation and things like that, okay? Schools that whites attended did not allow Blacks to enter them. So Blacks created Black HBCUs, historically Black universities. That's the reason why they exist today. So if you think that Black people want to be educated with only Black people, that's not the case. Policies and laws that discriminated against people of color forced them to create their own schools. That's the only reason why those things exist and still exist to this day, because institutional racism still exists. Okay, just because laws have changed, like the civil rights movement occurred, okay? And I shouldn't even say occurred, it's still occurring. The civil rights movement never ended. But just because now, you know, schools are desegregated, doesn't mean the institution changes completely. You allow students in of all races, but does that mean that the institution has completely changed? No. And I can give you some examples. Typically, presidents of universities are whom? Of when we're talking about race, what types of people? White. Okay? Typically, the top tiers of certain types of universities are composed of white people. Okay? There are still, the glass ceiling is a term we refer to women trying to break through, but there's still a ceiling that is very difficult to penetrate for Black individuals within the educational institution. Okay? Institutional racism still exists in the state. Okay? Many, for instance, God, we're going through the presidential election. I never thought that we'd see, you know, Barack Obama or somebody who looked like Barack Obama as president, but still we've only had one. Okay? Still, when it comes to people of color in Senate, few. Governors of color, few. Okay? Things have changed, but that doesn't mean that the institutions themselves that were founded on racism don't exist. Okay? Personal racism is the racial prejudice or discrimination expressed by individuals or some small groups of people. Some examples include individual racism can include face-to-face or covert actions towards people that intentionally express prejudice, hate, or bias based on race. Okay, so an example of personal racism. This is an example of personal racism and a hate crime. And when we discuss hate crime, I'll also link it to hate crime. But Dylan Roof, I believe it was in South Carolina, went into a church on purpose with the intention, if you can read his manifesto online, with the intention of killing Black parishioners. And he does. He kills, I think, 7. Okay? That's an example of personal racism. One thing I will tell you, if a person says they're racist, take them at their word. Okay? If you say you're a racist, you're a racist. Okay. He did. He's a personal racist. Okay? But also his actions towards people, towards Black people, showed that not only was he prejudiced against Black individuals, but he committed a crime, a hate crime, based on race towards Black people. Make sense? Okay? An example of institutional racism, sorry I missed this, school disciplinary policies in which students of color are punished at higher rates than their white counterparts. Also, I think I said that I used to get punished, detention for my hair being in puffs. I may have said this, right? But again, just because schools allow people of color to enter them doesn't mean that the policies and laws that were there during the founding of these institutions don't discriminate against them. So you have Mystic Valley Regional, which is here. One of its campuses is in my town, Mystic Valley Regional. Couple years back had to get rid of a law that punished, and it was only until it hit media, that used to punish Black girls for wearing their hair in braids, in puffs, etc. Okay? That's institutional racism. Okay? That's what we're usually talking about when we talk about Black Lives Matter. We're not talking about we're not necessarily talking about the individual police officers. We're talking about the policing system. Okay? So I encourage you, please do your own research on, again, there's a lot out there. Defunding the police. Okay? Doesn't mean, for at least not for all of us, not for me, doesn't mean, you know, getting rid of the police. No. We need the police, of course, right? But we defund education all the time. Okay? Do we need to actually militarize the police? Etc. But think outside, use your sociological imagination. Okay. Here's a figure of Tiger Woods. Okay. So a golfer, Tiger Woods, has Chinese, Thai, African American, Native American, and a Dutch heritage. Individuals with multiple ethnic backgrounds are becoming more and more common. Why do you think that is? Okay. Your chapter then goes on to discuss multiple identities. Okay. So, should I talk about this right now? So I'm going to go into this and then we're going to get into the theories, how our theoretical perspectives will look at this, right? So multiple identities. Increasingly during the modern era, the removal of certain types of laws and trends towards equal rights and legal protections against racism have steadily reduced the social stigma attached to racial exogamy. Again, we've gotten rid of, or many places have gotten rid of laws that prohibited marrying outside of your race. Okay, exogamy refers to marriage outside of a person's core social unit. So racial exogamy refers to marriage outside of one's racial background or racial unit. It's now common for the children of racially mixed parents to acknowledge and celebrate various ethnicities. So our example, again, was that of Tiger Woods. Okay. While this is a trend, it is not yet evident in all aspects of our society. For example, the US Census only recently added additional categories for people to identify themselves, such as non-white Hispanic. A growing number of people choose multiple races to describe themselves on the 2010 census, paving the way for the 2020 census to provide yet more choices. Okay. Ooh, we're gonna get into symbols, okay? So I will just note this quickly, that symbols are very, very important when it comes to sociology. Please refer back to chapter 3, our culture chapter as well, okay? So here obviously is an image, a figure of the Confederate flag. To some, the Confederate flag is a symbol of pride in Southern history. To others, it is a grim reminder of a degrading period of the United States' past, okay? When you see this flag, what does it mean to you? Okay. Now we have other symbols, okay, in the United States. Non-material culture and culture, remember that chapter. The United States flag is a symbol, a controversial symbol today, okay? Again, this flag, the United States flag, right, the red, white, and blue, for many is a symbol of patriotism, of pride, okay? And to others, a reminder of not just, the United States' past, but also today. And it's not so hot for a lot of us. For some of you, you know what's interesting? And this is just a side note. So one of my friends has this champion red hat. And this might sound wild, but I understood it, okay? When I see a red baseball cap, it's no longer just a red baseball cap because I'm looking for something, okay? And I'm looking for those words, make America great again. Again, I'm not gonna tell you my opinions or anything, but she asked me, should I get rid of this cap? Because you know what, the color red just on a baseball cap, it just doesn't, it makes my stomach turn. Anytime I see a red baseball cap, it makes my stomach turn. And I was like, if it does, throw it out, retire that hat, okay? And for some individuals, also seeing an American flag, 2020 has changed a lot of things for a lot of people. So the American flag, which, like a lot of us used to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance in our class every morning. Now, like if you see it on a house, doesn't mean the same thing anymore. And I would say for a lot of people in the community that I live in, right outside of Boston, seeing it, definitely ideas go through my head. What type of person lives in that house? And it's because of everything that we've been going through in the United States. I'm not talking about me personally, but just seeing everything that people are going through economically, politically, and socially. Take a look at this. Tell me what you think. Think of some other symbols. Tell me what you think. Okay. Intersections. Before I get into intersections, I might actually, I'll save this for the end. So I'm quickly just going to pause and I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. So lastly, your book is going to go over intergroup relations. Okay, intergroup relations are relationships between different groups of people. They can range along a spectrum between groups having tolerance for each other and groups having intolerance. The most tolerant form of intergroup relation is pluralism, in which no distinction is made between minority and majority groups, but instead there is equal standing. At the other end of the continuum are amalgamations, expulsions, and even genocides. So these are stark examples of intolerant intergroup relations, and we're going to go over each one. Genocide. Okay, genocide is the deliberate annihilation of a targeted group. It is the most toxic intergroup relationship. Okay. Historically, we can see that genocide has included both the intent to exterminate a group and the function of exterminating of a group, intentional or not. It's possibly the most well-known case of genocide is Hitler's attempt to exterminate the Jews. We know this as the Holocaust. Okay, so in the Holocaust, it was Hitler's attempt to eradicate minority groups such as Catholics, people with disabilities, homosexuals, and that's not just it, guys. Because if you read Hitler's Mein Kampf, I read it in grad school, okay? He was also very fascinated with the Black body, especially after, I forget what Olympics it was, but these track runners. So they also got rid of Blacks. Okay. So this is the most well-known, but we should also know Darfur, Rwanda, the Armenian genocide, the genocide in Bosnia and Herzegovina, etc. Most of these you should have already heard of. There's many, many more, okay? That's the most toxic form of intergroup relations. Genocide is not just a historical concept, it is practiced today. Recently, ethnic and geographic conflicts in Darfur and the Darfur region of the Sudan have led to hundreds of thousands of deaths. As part of the ongoing land conflict, the Sudanese government and their state-sponsored Janjaweed militia have led a campaign of killing, forced placement, and systematic rape of Darfuri people, although a treaty was signed in 2011. We also should know, again, it's 2020, things are popping off in 2020. You should know that there are other types of genocides going on in different regions of Africa. One thing I will say is that genocide is not just anybody can do genocide. We have genocides in the United States, okay? We had. I mean, if any of you have gone through social science class, you've learned about the Trail of Tears, and it wasn't just the Trail of Tears, but we tried to eradicate American Indians. So has Canada. So don't just think that, people of color do these things, because everybody does them, okay? Expulsion. Expulsion refers to a subordinate group being forced by a dominant group to leave a certain area or a country, as seen in the example of the Trail of Tears and in the Holocaust. Okay, expulsion can be a factor of genocide. Usually it happens at the beginning, before the genocide even happens. Okay, but it can also stand on its own as a destructive group interaction. Okay. So the United States, again, is known for the Japanese internment camps. And again, before the Japanese internment camps, it did go through a period of expulsion in 1942. Okay. So also that is listed in the book. Please go over that. And we also have segregation. Segregation refers to the physical separation of two groups, particularly in residence, but also in the workplace and social functions. There are two types of segregation: de jure segregation and de facto. De jure is segregation that is enforced by law, and de facto is segregation that occurs without laws, but because of other factors. So de jure segregation occurred in the United States for many years after the Civil War. During this time, many former Confederate states passed Jim Crow laws that required segregated facilities for Blacks and whites. These laws were codified in 1896, the landmark Supreme Court case, Plessy versus Ferguson, which stated that separate but equal facilities were constitutional. For the next 5 decades, Blacks were subjugated to legalized discrimination, forced to live, work, or go to school in separate but unequal facilities. It wasn't until 1954 that the Brown versus the Board of Education case that the Supreme Court declared that separate educational facilities are inherently unequal, this ending the de jure segregation in the United States. Okay. Oh, also, here's just an example. Again, Jim Crow South, it was legal to have separate but equal facilities for Blacks and whites. So if any of you remember in your social science classes, seeing figures and images of separate restaurants, separate water fountains or bubblers, separate churches, etc., separate schools. Okay. That was all de jure. De facto segregation, however, cannot be abolished by any court mandate. Segregation is still alive and well in the United States, with different racial or ethnic groups often segregated by neighborhood, borough, or parish. So many of you live in Massachusetts. I don't know how many of you actually live in New Hampshire, but I don't know how neighborhoods are separated in New Hampshire. So I can only speak to Massachusetts. But for those of you who live in Massachusetts, have you ever wondered why there is such a distinct racial divide between the North Shore and the South Shore? Okay, I live in the North Shore. Okay, but the North Shore and the South Shore are very different. Okay, again, we've gotten rid of de jure segregation. Again, de jure segregation by law. We've gotten rid of it. Okay, but de facto segregation, we still see. If any of you have ever gone to LA County, that's an example. I used to live in California, not LA, but I've been through it. There are racialized boroughs. Okay, New York, racialized boroughs. For those of you who are interested, there's a documentary called Fence Line that talks about immigrants usually who work as carpenters, who would work in Long Island. I also live in Long Island, but Long Island natives and those who lived there really had an issue with it, okay? Why do you think some of these neighborhoods are segregated by race, okay? Probably is de facto segregation. There are other factors, right, that can separate us. It doesn't have to be by law. Okay, your neighborhood councils can separate people. Redlining policies, which are illegal, right? But realtors and banks can do them. It's not legal, but they have their ways around them. Sociologists use segregation indices to measure racial segregation of different races in different areas. These indices employ a scale from 0 to 100, where 0 is the most integrated and 100 is the least. In New York, in the New York metropolitan area, for instance, the Black-White Segregation Index was 79 for the years between 2005 and 2009. This means that 79% of either Blacks or whites would have to move in order for each neighborhood to have the same racial balance as the whole metro region. Okay. And pluralism, okay? Pluralism is the most ideal, okay, form of intergroup relations. So pluralism is represented by the ideal of the United States as a salad bowl. So we did that, you guys had that Flipgrid assignment, right? Where I asked you, is the United States, you know, a melting pot or a salad bowl, right? And I think of a salad bowl differently than our books thinks of a salad bowl. But, okay, so it's represented by the ideal of the United States as a salad bowl, a great mixture of different cultures where each culture retains its own identity yet adds the flavor to the flavor of the whole. True pluralism is characterized by mutual respect on all parts of the cultures, both dominant and subordinate, creating a multicultural environment of acceptance. In reality, true pluralism is difficult to reach, okay? We're living in that, okay? In the United States, the mutual respect required by pluralism is often missing, and the nation's past pluralist model of a melting pot posits a society where cultural differences aren't embraced as much as erased, okay? So there are a couple of figures towards the end of the chapter. So should I get into assimilation? I will leave assimilation for later on. I'll just catch up on it later. But there are a couple of figures in the remaining chapter. Please go through them. They talk about specifically race and ethnicity in the United States. So you're going to go through Native Americans briefly, the Vietnamese, who else? Hold on just a second. Asians, Hispanics, Blacks, etc. Okay. What I want to get to right now, so I'm going to stop sharing, is our theoretical perspectives, and I'll end with this. Okay. What would a functionalist say about racial inequality in the United States? So you may have to rewind back to the beginning of this lecture, right? But what would they say, right? If a functionalist can say economic inequality is beneficial, you know, to society, they can also say racial inequality is beneficial. They may not say it outright, like rightly like that. So they might not say it exactly like that, you know, but somebody who is using a functional lens might say, you know, those individuals are actually good at doing that kind of stuff, you know, so they should stay right there. You know, we often hear people say, you know, like Hispanics are really good at cleaning. They're really good at like growing crops. Okay. You know, Asians are really good at math. They're really good at science and the STEMs. Okay. You know, Blacks aren't really good at whatever. Okay. But they think each person has a role in society. Okay. And are we in the United States stratified by race? Yes. Historically, we've been, where historically whites have occupied the higher tiers in society than Asians, than Blacks, than American Indians. Okay, so race would actually be, racial inequality, racism would be beneficial to the functionalist. Okay, and many of us don't like to think of our family members like this, you know, but you might know a functionalist who thinks like this, you know, who says, you know, like, you might go to them and be like, wow, you know, like, it does seem like these people get treated harshly. And that member might just be like, well, it is what it is. That's functionalist. It's functionalist. Remember, we participate in these systems involuntarily. So I'm not calling that person a racist. That never came out of my mouth. But you are participating in it. Conflict theorist would say racial inequality is harmful. Okay? It creates nothing but drama. So, you know, like it only benefits those who, remember, those, racial inequality only benefits those who are in that top tier when it comes to how we are stratified racially. So if it benefits you, you're probably that type of person who'd be like, you know what, I feel bad for you, but I'm not gonna do anything. Okay? But there's a reason why people protest for economic inequality. There's a reason why we went through Occupy Wall Street. That's a conflict perspective. There's a reason why BLM and Native American movements and Chicano movements happen. It's racial inequality. Asian movements, racial inequality. Essentially, that's a conflict perspective. This shit is harmful. These institutions are inherently racist and they're hurting us. The way these policies and laws are set up in these institutions, they don't actually make things equal. Yes, we have access to them, but we're not treated the same within them. Get it? Okay. So I got a great example. So conflict perspective, a real life example of the conflict perspective when looking at racial inequality. Black Lives Matter, Alaskan Native movements, Asian American movements, Chicano movements, etc. Get it? Functionalist perspective, okay? Because functionalists can have their own movements as well, okay? So those are individuals who try to keep things the way that they are because they, again, benefit them, okay? Not keep things the way that they are. The system works. If it's not working for you, you are the problem. Remember Emile Durkheim, you know, different limbs create a functioning system. Everybody has their role, okay? So somebody coming from the functionalist lens would say, you know, like, I don't think, they would actually say, I don't think the issue is racism. I think you could actually do better. So for instance, we shouldn't be judged based on the color of our skin, right? Because some laws have changed, okay? But can people still be judged in different ways based on, again, the types of people that we, how do I say this? I can't judge you based on your skin, but I can, guys, this is like, I'm just hoping you get it, okay? And if you don't, I'll probably come back in the next lecture just to, I gotta think about it a bit, okay? But symbolic interactionism. So symbolic interactionist, again, let's bring it down. This is more micro. We're not talking necessarily about the world and macro level things, okay? Have you experienced racism, unfair treatment, prejudice, discrimination in your neighborhood? So in my neighborhood, I've never actually experienced racism or discrimination or prejudice. Well, prejudice, yeah. People think things all the time, right? But discrimination where somebody has actually, you know, taken that action because of prejudice, no. Okay. However, when I move outside of context beyond my own, so have I gotten stares when I enter Amesbury? Yes. Have I gotten stares when I go into Andover? Yes. Have I gotten stares when I roll into New Hampshire? Yeah. And followed around in stores. Okay. And again, that doesn't necessarily have to only be based on race, but things that I can't control. But since we're talking about race, in this chapter, that could be an example. Okay. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I want to mention. I did mention anybody could be prejudiced. I did mention anybody could be discriminatory. Anybody could commit a hate crime. Okay. And a hate crime based on race, anybody can commit. Okay. Everyone can participate in racism, involuntarily or not. Okay. I can contribute to racism involuntarily. Okay. You can as well. Remember the bystander approach effect from the first lecture I was talking about with economic inequality. Okay. However, when it comes to institutional racism, I'm not talking about personal, institutional racism. Okay. The institutions are already founded in the United States. I can only participate in those. Okay. However, the institutions already favor a certain type of person. And that person is not me. Okay, so do I still get affected by institutional racism in the United States? Yes. Okay, I work at NECC. You know, have I ever been cussed out by a student because I was Black or a faculty member because I was Black? No. Okay, but have there been, you know, maybe certain types of openings and vacancies that I've applied for that maybe I also have credit for, the credentials for that I didn't get? And I've wondered why. So I'm not saying that this is racist, but I wondered why, yes. especially when I have credentials higher than certain people. And I still don't get those. What is it? Okay, so I'm just saying, what is it? What do you think it is? Okay. So I hope this helps. And if you got any questions, please drop an email. We can set up some office hours, etc. Sound good, guys? So I'm probably going to come back and give you guys some examples of the functionalist perspective when it comes to racial inequality. Okay? Sound good? Peace out.